All right, let's get started with another deep dive. This time we're tackling Heart of Darkness and its film adaptation, Apocalypse Now. And we know you're joining us with a very specific lens, right? That Catholic perspective. So let's see what we can uncover together.
Yeah, both these stories, they really get at something deep, don't they? About humanity, about morality, about that struggle with darkness. And yeah, examining them through a Catholic lens, I think it can offer some really unique insights.
Totally. So we're starting with Heart of Darkness, right? That journey up the Congo River with Marlowe, all the exploitation and brutality he witnesses. And it's not just physical, is it? It's like a spiritual descent, too, into darkness.
And right there, you see those Catholic themes starting to emerge, right? That descent into darkness, the idea that there's a heart of darkness within each of us. I mean, that speaks directly to the Catholic understanding of concupiscence, right? That inclination towards sin that we all inherit. The Congo River, in a way, I think it becomes like a metaphor for that internal struggle.
Wow, that's a really cool way to look at it. And then, of course, you have Kurtz, right, this enigmatic figure. He's totally given in to the allure of power, almost like a demigod to the natives. A lot of people see him as a cautionary tale. But how does that fit into a Catholic interpretation, I wonder?
Well, I think instead of just seeing Kurtz as this generic fallen figure, we can really analyze him through the lens of some specific Catholic concepts like pride, right? The deadliest of the 7 deadly sins, and how it just fuels Kurtz's ambition, that lust for power, his fall. It's a stark reminder of the danger when you succumb to pride. And the abuse of free will, right? I mean, that's a central concept in Catholic theology.
Okay, that totally makes sense. And there's some really disturbing scenes in the book, that seem to really resonate with these themes. Like early on, Marlowe comes across a group of chained natives. They're dying in the heat. It's just heartbreaking. It makes you question the whole colonial enterprise, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And that's where I think Catholic social teaching comes in. Because the novel, through this really stark depiction of exploitation and dehumanization, it challenges us to consider something, doesn't it? That inherent dignity of every single human person. And that is a cornerstone of Catholic belief. The actions of the colonizers, driven by greed, that sense of superiority, right? It stands in direct opposition to that principle.
So it's not just about, individual sin then,
Right.
but also those societal structures that perpetuate this injustice, this disregard for human dignity.
Exactly. Heart of darkness. It compels us to look beyond individual characters and confront the systemic evils that contribute to suffering, don't they? And moral decay. It reminds us that our faith calls us to be advocates for justice, to work towards a world that upholds the dignity of all people.
Now, what about Marlowe? He sees all this darkness, but then in the end chooses to lie to Kurtz's intended about his final words. How do we reconcile that with Catholic teachings on truth?
Oh, that's where things get really interesting. Because Marlowe's lie, while seemingly well-intentioned, could be seen as a misguided act of mercy, or even a failure to confront the truth. It brings up some really important questions, doesn't it? About the limits of compassion and those potential pitfalls when we shield ourselves or others from uncomfortable realities.
It's like he's choosing comfort over truth.
Right.
Which seems to go against the Catholic emphasis on honesty and integrity.
Right. And it begs the question, for us as Catholics, how do we balance compassion with truthfulness? When is it okay to shield others from pain, right? And when does that shielding become deception? Deception that hinders true growth and understanding.
Wow, that's a lot to think about. Okay, so we've seen how Heart of Darkness, even without being overtly religious, really speaks to those Catholic themes. But how does that carry over to Apocalypse Now? It's a completely different setting, right? The Vietnam War.
Yeah, you can definitely see the parallels, right?
For sure. So in Apocalypse Now, we have Captain Willard, right? He's on this mission to assassinate Colonel Kurtz, this Green Beret who's gone totally rogue in Cambodia. It's like they took the story of Heart of Darkness and just dropped it right into the middle of the Vietnam War.
And just like that Congo River in the novel, the journey upriver in Apocalypse Now becomes a visual and symbolic representation of that descent into the heart of darkness. Willard's mission takes him deeper, right? Deeper into those horrors of war. And it's like a mirror, isn't it? A spiritual journey into the depths of human depravity.
It's definitely not a relaxing cruise, that's for sure. And speaking of going deep, man, the film is just visually stunning. That opening sequence with the helicopters, the Doors playing the end, talk about setting an eerie and unsettling tone.
Oh, absolutely. Coppola, he really uses those powerful visuals to get that across, doesn't he? That whole descent into darkness, the psychedelic scenes, those haunting landscapes, that increasing surrealism as the film goes on. It all builds up to this feeling of being overwhelmed by the darkness. It's like you're witnessing the chaos of war and the internal struggle of the soul all at once.
And then there's Colonel Kilgore, right? The surfing-obsessed commander, Robert Duvall. He's almost like a caricature of American military might, but there's something so deeply unsettling about him.
Oh, yeah. Kilgore, he really embodies those moral compromises that war often forces on people. He's a stark example of how the pursuit of victory, that desire for power, can just completely disregard human life and dignity.
So he's not just a quirky character, right? He represents something really dangerous, that potential for power to corrupt. I mean, even those who might have started with good intentions.
Exactly. Kilgore, with his obsession with winning at all costs, it reflects a distorted sense of morality, doesn't it? Where the ends justify the means. A cautionary tale about the dangers of moral relativism, which the Catholic Church strongly condemns.
And that attack on the village, set to Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries, another scene that's just breathtaking, but incredibly disturbing at the same time. Like, it's beautiful, but horrifying.
That scene, I think it really encapsulates the film's complex exploration of violence. That beauty of the imagery, it clashes so strongly with the brutality of what's happening. And it forces us to confront something, right? That seductive nature of violence, that temptation that's inside all of us. And from a Catholic perspective, I think it raises questions about the just war doctrine, doesn't it? The moral implications of using overwhelming force, even for a seemingly righteous cause.
It's interesting, because Apocalypse Now, for all its violence and darkness, actually seems to align with the Catholic understanding of war as a consequence of sin.
Yeah, I think you're right. The film doesn't shy away from showing us the ugliness of war, does it? And the impact it has on the human soul. It really portrays war as chaotic, morally ambiguous. Even the best intentions can lead to devastating consequences. And that aligns, doesn't it, with that Catholic view that war, while sometimes necessary, it's ultimately a result of humanity's fallen nature, the presence of sin in the world.
So both Heart of Darkness and Apocalypse Now, they act as warnings, right? About what happens when we lose sight of our humanity, when we give in to the allure of power, the temptations of darkness. But what about Marlowe and Willard? They're not saints, but they're also searching for something, right? Amidst all the darkness.
That's what makes them so compelling, isn't it? They're flawed, yeah.
Yeah.
Deeply affected by all the darkness they encounter. But there's something else, too. They're drawn to the truth, even if it's painful, even if it's unsettling. And their journeys, I think they reflect that internal struggle between sin and grace, which, every Catholic grapples with.
They remind me of those figures in the Bible, the ones who wrestled with God, questioning and challenging, even as they're trying to understand His will.
That's a great comparison. Yeah, both Marlowe and Willard, they're on this spiritual quest, aren't they? Trying to find meaning in a world that often seems to lack it. And really resonates, I think, with that Catholic understanding of life as a pilgrimage, a journey towards God. But it's full of challenges, isn't it? And temptations.
And both stories, they end in these incredibly ambiguous ways. Marlowe chooses to lie, right? Protecting Kurtz is intended from the truth. And Willard, well, his decision to kill Kurtz, it's presented in this really complicated way. Layers of symbolism, moral ambiguity. What are we supposed to make of that as viewers?
I think those endings, they're refusing to give us easy answers, tidy resolutions. We're left with a sense of unease, right? Questions that are unanswered. And I think that's intentional. It's a reminder that life, especially the spiritual life, is rarely about black and white choices. It's navigating those gray areas, wrestling with those difficult decisions, and seeking God's grace, even when we stumble.
So it's like they're saying, hey, here's this mess of human experience, the complexities of good and evil, the struggles of the soul. Go figure it out.
Exactly. And that, I think, is what makes these stories so powerful, especially for someone approaching them from that Catholic perspective. They challenge us, don't they, to confront the darkness within ourselves and in the world, to wrestle with that doubt, that uncertainty, and to ultimately deepen our faith through that struggle.
It's like they're throwing down a gauntlet.
Yeah.
Right? Especially for someone who's really engaged with their faith.
They are. And I think that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. On the surface, you have two stories set in very different times and places, colonial Africa, the Vietnam War. But beneath that surface, there's something else, these universal themes about human nature, sin and redemption, that struggle to find meaning in a world that often feels meaningless.
And it's those universal themes that make them so relevant, right? Even today. They speak to something deep down inside us, something that goes beyond time and place. They're about the human heart, aren't they? And its capacity for great good and terrible evil. And that concept, it's at the very heart of Catholic theology.
Yeah, exactly. They make us confront those difficult questions that maybe we'd rather avoid. They challenge us to examine our own hearts, right? And ask ourselves, what do I truly believe? What am I willing to fight for? And what kind of world do I want to create? And for someone of faith, those questions, they take on an even deeper significance, don't they? It prompts us to think about our relationship with God, our role in his plan for salvation.
It's almost like, by going into that heart of darkness, Kurtz exposes something. It's like he shows us how empty it is. It lacks any real substance. And by doing that, he kind of accidentally reveals the possibility of something more, I guess, something beyond just the material, the superficial.
That is really insightful, I think. And it connects so well with the Catholic idea of transcendence, right? Seeking something beyond just the physical world. Kurtz, in his rejection of that so-called civilized world, he stumbles on this truth, doesn't he? But in a way that's flawed and ultimately tragic.
And thinking about it from your perspective, as a devout Catholic, maybe this interpretation could give you a whole new way to think about sacrifice. It's not just about physical suffering, right?
Yeah.
It's about giving yourself over to a higher purpose, even if it means rejecting the world's values, what the world expects of you.
Exactly. Kurtz's sacrifice, as messed up as it is, it becomes like a catalyst, doesn't it, for those around him? It forces them to confront the darkness inside themselves, to question their own beliefs, like the very foundation of what they believe. It's a challenge to that complacency, right? A call to wake up to something deeper, to a deeper reality.
And that challenge, I think it's part of what makes both of these stories, Heart of Darkness and Apocalypse Now, so relevant, right? Especially today, and especially for people of faith. It's like a reminder, isn't it, that the journey towards God, towards truth, it's rarely easy or comfortable. It's a struggle, this constant wrestling with doubt, with temptation. And sometimes it means we have to confront the darkest parts of ourselves and the world around us.
And it's in that struggle, right, in that confrontation where we find the potential for real growth, real transformation. As Catholics, we believe that it's through suffering, through embracing the cross, that we ultimately find redemption and union with God. And these stories, they offer us a glimpse of that truth, I think, in their own way.
So even though Heart of Darkness and Apocalypse Now, they don't give us easy answers or tie everything up neatly at the end, they give us something else, like a framework maybe for dealing with some of the biggest questions we face. What is good and evil? What's the meaning of it all? Is redemption possible?
And they invite us, don't they, as viewers, as people of faith, to really grapple with these questions, to confront that darkness, to look for the light, even in those unexpected places.
That's a great way to put it. So to our listener out there, I'd say this. Don't shy away from the darkness these stories explore. Embrace the challenge, wrestle with those questions, and see how they might deepen your understanding of your own faith and your place in the world. Because sometimes, the deepest truths are hidden in the most unexpected places.
It's been great exploring all this with you. And remember, the journey doesn't end here.
And that's a wrap for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.